G'day guys, and welcome back to the OzzyOcker Workbench build. I think this is part 7, and in this part we're going to have a look at this frame. It's all looking pretty good, but I think we can make it better. There's a few things I want to do to this frame. First off, I want to get a rail spanning from that front rail across to the back rail, across there, sunk to this surface here, just to give the top a little bit of support, and it also stops these rails from being able to twist. Because at the moment those rails, there's no support for the rails at all, but if those rails want to twist in the middle of it, they can, because there's nothing stopping it. So this rail, it just adds a little bit more resistance to any of that. Secondly, I want to get some little blocks of timber with nice square faces, put it into the connection between the rail and the leg, a little bit of glue, clamp across the top, and we just glue them in there. It just adds a significant amount of strength to these connections with scrap wood and a little bit of glue. So there's really no reason not to do that. The last thing I want to do is I want to get another bit of timber and run it across in these corners, on all 4 corners, at a 45-degree angle, just to give the frame a little bit of bracing. Because what can happen is, if you've got your back frame here and your front frame there, and it's all locked in and you think it's all rock solid, but I start planing across this front here, putting a lot of force on the front of the frame, what can actually happen is the back frame remains nice and solid, but the front frame starts to walk forward. It's not racking this way, the whole frame is simply shifting forwards. Basically these rails are pulling forwards that way. So if you put 45-degree bracing in each corner, in order for it to rack that way, it needs to actually compress this rail here and tension that rail there, and it won't be able to do that, so it becomes rock solid. So I'll show this just once. This is how I put the small rebate on the corner braces. It's a very risky way of doing it. A better way to do it is just with a handsaw. Much better way of doing it. So to join the centre rail to the 2 longer rails, I'm going to use a half-blind dovetail. It's the best joint for the connection, given the fact that it's a end grain to short grain connection. There's really only one choice. You could use dowels as well. It's not as good as a dovetail, but it would be good enough. So first up with this centre rail, you don't want to measure it out between that distance here. You want to measure out between this distance here, because these rails may be bent, and they certainly are. If I get an engineered straight edge, put it on there, you can see I've got, if I put it hard up against this side, I've got about 2 millimeters of a gap there, so this is actually bellied out that way. Same with that rail, it's also bellied out that way, so that distance between here is going to be a lot more than what it is at the ends. So I've measured it out between the ends there, so that if I slip it in there, I've got a little bit of movement. I've got, I don't know, 0.4 of a mil there. But over here, I've got nearly 3 millimeters. So now I can get a clamp over that, pull it up tight against these shoulders, and that will pull those rails back in line into square. And then I can mark out the dovetail onto the top here, get it square, transfer the lines down, and then we can chop it out. So I've got a centre line marked on the top of these rails, and I've also got the centre of this rail marked, so I can just line that up, and that will get me pretty close to where this needs to go. It doesn't actually matter if it goes this way or that way a little bit, it doesn't matter at all. And then while I've got this clamp holding those rails together, those clamps on the ends that are pulling the frame back into square, we want to put these in place and mark them with a knife around it so we can remove the waste so that they drop into the frame. You don't have to measure these ones out. I've got 2 shoulders underneath there, which I cut in a most unsavory way. I can simply put one edge up against the other, butt it up against there. It finds its home position there, and then you can just mark around it without moving it. Then once you've got it marked, you can move it and it's all good. So because each of these will be slightly different, we'll just mark it as a number 1, and we'll put this leg as a number 1. That way this one goes with that. Now it's very important that you've actually got this frame square before you put or mark the locations of this, because if you've got that swung all the way out there, this is going to move over that way, and this will actually hold the frame out of square, because wherever this is now, this is what this is going to do. This is going to hold it in place. That's the idea anyway. Nice. Oh, straight into the dog hole. Whoops. So the dowels will lock that brace in there when the joints are being pulled and pushed against. The dowels just stop that from being pulled apart. So by rights, with these bits of bracing in there, when I take these clamps off, which are currently pulling the frame into square, it should stay square, because that should resist that movement with a bit of luck. Now the clamps aren't doing much, they're only pulling it out of square by, or into square by about 1/2 millimetre or 1 millimetre or so, but it shouldn't spring back. So if I throw the tape corner to corner, 28 and 27, so that's now holding square, so that's good. So now I need to house in this dovetail to accept that top rail. So to do that, I need to transfer all of these lines down the face so I know what I'm aiming for. And then using a marking gauge, we can figure out how high we need to cut this down. Just the measurement doesn't matter, just that height is what's important. So we stop cutting right there. Perfect. Nice. There's nothing special about a glue block. Quite literally, it's just a block, a square edge block that fits into the corner. If the corner's not square, you just make your block to suit, and you just put some glue on it, press it into the corner, and the stiction from the glue is enough to hold it in place. You don't need to create the perfect joint, you just need to get it in there and just get it done. Like, I just do them on all projects because they're so easy. So there we go, we've got our corner bracing in, our centre rail in, our glue blocks done, and I also went ahead and smoothed out all of the outside faces, put an arris on all of the corners here so that when I reach in and drag my arm across that corner, it doesn't just shear the skin off my arm there, because that sucks when you've got a sharp edge and it just, like that's a sharp edge there and I really can just, especially across your knuckles. Ugh, I don't like that. So I've gone and arrised all of those edges, everything's looking good. So now, the last thing I want to do in this video is, if you recall back when I cut these legs to length and I put this top tenon on there and then I put the mortises in there, it was the mortising video. I wasn't sure what this angle was going to be. I wasn't sure what this angle was going to be. I know what it was supposed to be, but I don't know if I actually got it perfect. Now, as it turns out, in hindsight, I'm so bloody close to what it needs to be that I could have just cut these shoulders to the exact perfect height instead of leaving them a little bit longer as I have. So it's a bit of a shame because now I have to chisel them away by hand. But while I'm here, I want to check that, forget about the legs for a minute, I want to check these 4 rails. And I want to make sure that they're in plane, a nice flat surface. I don't care if it's twisted, I don't care if it's tilted that way or that way or that way or that way a little bit. Couldn't give a stuff. It's pretty level as far as I'm concerned. But I want this rail to be in line with that rail. I want this rail to be in line with that rail. I want this rail to be in line with that rail. Nice flat surface. Now to do that, because I've got this center rail in here and my straight edge that I've been using throughout this entire build, what I can do is I can put it across there, oh, don't fall, and I can look straight through there to see how much of a gap I've got. There shouldn't actually be a gap, it should be sitting exactly perfect, but this rail's a little bit low obviously. It's no big deal, I can deal with that later. But if I just remember roughly what that looks like, just roughly, you don't have to get feeler gauges out. And then from there, I can begin making a series of checks by putting this straight edge corner to corner, not on top of the legs, just next to the legs, because the legs are currently sitting too high. Just sit that there, get that to stand up. It's very thin MDF. Have a look at my gap. Yeah, it's about the same. Go to the other corner. Have a look at my gap. It's about the same, so I know that those side rails are pretty good. So if I then put it on my longer rails, same again, corner to corner. I'll just hold it here. Yep, pretty good. And the last one, once again, corner to corner on the rails, not on top of the legs. We've got our gap, and yeah, so as far as I'm aware, by put in a straight edge corner to corner everywhere, we can see that if it was out of plane at any point, the slight gap that I had on top of here would have increased to become a bigger gap at a certain point. If, say for example, if that corner was sitting up high, when I put the board over there, that would actually lift that up there. So it would lift that point up a little bit, but it didn't. Or if one of these was low, the gap would have reduced and it would have started seesawing on this center rail there. But we found that the gap is basically the same all the way around. Therefore, I know that this top is near on perfect flat, which is good. So now I can use the top edges of these rails to figure out where I'm going to chop these legs down to. Basically, whatever line this takes, I'm just going to extend across the front of my legs and across the side. I'm going to chisel it away. The shoulder on the inside, I'll try to keep as close as I can to the outside, but I don't really care. I'm just going to get rid of it. If I need to sit it low, I will. And ideally, when I square that across there, that should actually hit this line here, which it's pretty close. I'll trust it. Pretty good. That'll look pretty nice. A little bit of a gap right there, but whatever. Alright, it's done. Legs are nice and smooth, corner braces in there, glue blocks in there, centre rail in there, top of the legs flushed up, I think. I'm not overly sure about those, and I can't actually think of a good way to check it now. The only thing I can do is in the next video, put the top on top of it. So that's what we'll be doing. Finally! Can't wait to get the top on here. So good. Catch us later.